Hey guys, this is Fred from Fly Games, and this is episode 6 in how to build an online first-person shooting using Unity and Photon Fusion. In this episode we'll add support for basic projectiles such as grenades and rocket launchers. Let's get started with how to implement this in Unity. To make this tutorial session a bit shorter, I've prepared a few prefabs. So we have a new particle system, which is an explosion. So let's add that to the scene just to show it. And it looks like this. So if we start it, it will blow up. So that's something we will use for the grenades and the rockets. And then we will also use projectiles. So we have a grenade prefab, so we can add that to the scene. And it's just a prefab or a sphere with a rigid body on it. So if we run our scene, it will just act as a regular Unity object. So it will bounce and not do anything, and it's not networked yet. And then we have a rocket prefab that looks like this, and it's just a model with a simple body and some fins and a particle system that is behind it. So those are the new components that we will use for this tutorial session. So let's start with our grenade, and we will make that a networked object with physics. So let's go in the scripts, let's create a new folder, call it projectiles, and then we will create a new C# script called grenade handler. Awesome. And then we will go into our prefab and select our, it needs to just reload my scripts for some reason. So let's go into projectiles, select our grenade, and we need to have this as a network object. So let's go network object, and then we will need it to be a rigid body network object as well, and then we will need our grenade handler. Awesome. We have this network rigid body, and we want to interpolate the target, which is going to be the model. So let's drag that in there. And then we are all set to start programming in our grenade handler. Then let's open our grenade handler in Visual Studio. And this will be a very basic grenade, so it will be networked, but it will actually not use any specific logic. It will just instantiate a networked grenade that will be thrown in a direction, and then it will explode. So how we do that is, well, let's start by using Fusion. Then we will change this into a network behavior. And then we can actually get rid of our start function because we don't need that, and not the update either. So what we will do is we will have a player throw a grenade, and we will use our weapon handler for this. So what we need to do is we need to add a new method called throw, and it will take in a few things, like the vector, where are we throwing the grenade, what force, in what direction, the player ref of whoever is throwing it, and the name of the player that is throwing it, so we can send our cool network messages, who killed who, etc. Alright, and then we will need to cache a few components, or actually we need to access them. One of them is the network object, and the other one is the rigid body. So when we have instantiated our grenade, we will call our throw method that will influence this. So first of all, let's get our network object, and we use get component, and then we'll get our network rigid body. And once we have our network rigid body, we can actually apply the force. So we'll apply add force, throw force with the force mode impulse, so it gets the force directly. Then we also want to store our values, throw player ref and thrown by player name. So we need to add those as variables. So let's do that. And then we will store them. So we know that this specific grenade has been thrown by a player. Then we want the grenade to explode after some time. And in other tutorials we have used coroutines, which is not the optimal way of doing it when it comes to networking. So we're going to do it the right way this time. So we're going to use a tick timer, and we'll set it to none as a start. And when we actually have thrown it, then we are going to start our tick timer. And the tick timer is going to explode after, well, it's going to expire after 2 seconds. Right, and we need to check this in our fixed update network, because that's when we can decide if something has happened to it. And what we will check then is if it has expired. And we will actually only run this on our state authority. So let's have that manage the whole grenade lifecycle. And then, as we have determined that this is going to run only on our state authority, then we can check that, okay, has our explode tick timer expired? So if it has, then this code will execute. And one important thing with tick timers is that they are going to trigger because it has expired, and then it's going to run again and trigger again. So it's important to actually stop them, and one easy way of doing that is setting the tick timer to none, because then it has not expired. So this code will run once, and when it has determined that it's expired, then we will, well, execute this. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to remove our grenade, and we want it to explode. So let's start by just removing it, and we will just do a runner despawn network object. So the server will say that, hey, okay, we're going to despawn our grenade here, and it will disappear from the scene and the game. But we want some kind of juicy explosion, right? So we will hook up our despawn script. Of course, there are other ways of doing it. We can use timers on all the clients, etc. But I'm going to do it a very easy way. So we're going to react on all clients when it's despawned. And what we want to do is we're going to instantiate an explosion. So let's add a game object for that. Public game object explosion particle system prefab. So we're just going to instantiate it. And this is not something that needs networking. So we can just instantiate it as a regular Unity object. But we want to instantiate it at the correct position, which is not always where this network object is, because it can be interpolated on the clients, which means that the model of this object is somewhere else. So let's get that the model instead, which is going to be our grenade mesh. So we use get component in children, and then we know the position of our grenade mesh. And now we can instantiate our particle system. Alright, so let's save that. Then we also need the grenade to actually be thrown by something. So we need to determine if the player is hitting the right buttons to throw a grenade. So let's go into our network input data, and we will need to add a new boolean for this, just to check is grenade fire button pressed. And then we'll go into our character input handler, and we need to add a boolean check here as well to see that, okay, have we pressed our grenade button. And then we will go down and find our throw grenade, which we're going to use the G button for. And finally, we need as well for that information to be passed on to the network. So we'll use our network input data is grenade fired button pressed, is grenade fire button pressed. Awesome. But then we also need this to actually, well, the grenade to actually be instantiated by something, and that's going to be our weapon handler. So let's open our weapon handler. actually one part that I missed. The character input handler, we need to reset this variable once we have actually sent it to the network. So let's do that, otherwise we're going to get an endless amount of grenades thrown. Alright, so let's go back into our weapon handler. Then let's add our network grenade prefab to this. So let's structure it a little bit better. So we'll add a header prefabs, and then we'll take in an object called grenade prefabs, and it's going to be a grenade handler, so that we know that it's actually a grenade that we're getting in here. And then let's actually fix some of these things because it's getting a lot of public variables here. So let's add some headers to it so we know what is what. And then we'll add an aim and a collision layer. And then let's move our network part to the bottom actually. There we go. So now we have a little bit more structure in this, and it's easier to read our code. Great. So now we want to react when a person is actually trying to throw a grenade. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we're gonna add our a new function for this, like fire. We're gonna replicate that, and we're gonna do a fire grenade instead, and it's going to take an aim forward vector so we know in what direction we are throwing it. And then we want to make sure that our grenades are not being spammed, so that you can't throw grenades too frequently. So let's add that as well to our code, and we will do it the right way this time and use our tick timer. So let's do timing, tick timer, grenade, fire delay, and we are going to check our fire grenade here if if we have recently fired a grenade. So we are going to check that it's either not expired or not running. So that means that we can throw a grenade. And once we have thrown it, we're going to set our tick timer to 1 second, so we can't throw it again within 1 second. Awesome. And then we want to spawn our grenade when this happens. So what we will do is we're going to do our a bit of code here, and we're going to do runner spawn our grenade prefab on our aim point position with a little bit ahead of the aim point position, so it's going to extend in the direction of the aim forward vector times 1.5. So this ensures that when we are throwing a grenade, it's not stuck inside the head of our character. And it's going to have a rotation of, well, the look orientation. This doesn't really matter when it comes to a grenade. It could actually be thrown in any direction because it's just a rigid body. And then we're going to put our input authority, and then we are going to execute this lambda code, which will happen right after we have created this object, and it's going to be called spawned grenade. So our spawned grenade, we're going to get the grenade handler, and we're going to use the function throw with our aim forward vector times 15. So that's going to be our throw force. And then we're going to say that it's this object input authority that threw it, and the network name of the player that threw the grenade. So with this code, we also need to actually run fire grenade. So let's look at our input here, and we're going to do if our data has is grenade fire button pressed, we are going to do a fire grenade. Okay, so if we save this now and go back into Unity, we should be able to take it for a spin. Alright, so we need to assign our explosion particle system in this slot. So let's find our particle system and explosion particle system. Let's drag it in there, and let's exit prefab and save it. And then as well, we need to open our player prefab, and we need to assign the things in here. Our grenade prefab needs to be assigned. So let's do that. And then, yeah, everything else seems to be correct. So let's save that. So let's take this for a spin, and we will as well bring in a client. So I've compiled a client. So let's just bring the size down a little bit. All right, so here we have the host, and let's join in with Eddie as well. So we can run around here with the host, and yeah, there's Eddie. And if we press the G button, we can actually throw our grenade. And there it exploded. And we can do the same thing with the client. Right, like that. Perfect, it works. But it doesn't do any damage yet. So that's the next thing we'll tackle. So let's stop our client and as well our host. So now we want our grenade to do some damage to the players around it. So let's go into projectiles, our grenade handler, and let's go down to when it is actually exploding. So before we are despawning it, we want the server or the host to check if anyone has taken damage from it. So what we will do is we're going to use an overlap sphere. So we will do runner, lag compensation, overlap sphere, and we will check if from where the grenade is now, we're going to check with a sphere if anything is within it with a radius of 4, and we're going to check it from the thrown by player ref, so that's the lag compensation for that player, and then it will return some hits and collision layers. We're going to use some specific collision layers to set what we are actually checking this overlap sphere against, but we need to add hits first. So that's going to be our hit info. So it's going to be a list of lag composition hit, and we're going to call it hits and just create that list. And then we need our collision layers. So that's going to be our layer mask. So again, let's actually clean up our code a little bit so it becomes more readable. So let's add our header, well, it's a prefab, so that's correct. And then we can copy it and call it collision detection. All right, so let's save that and go into, well, actually we're not done yet. So we have checked that, okay, we have a collision here, and we're not doing anything with it. So we need to actually act upon that as well. So what are we going to do? Well, we are going to loop through our hits and see what was hit. So we're going to use a for loop for this, and we're going to loop through the list, or actually not the full list because it could be larger, but we're going to loop from 0 to hit count. So that way we don't go outside of the list or actually read some old objects that could have been supplied by a previous checkup. All right, and then we're going to see, okay, is this hits if it has a hitbox on it. And we're going to get a component called HP handler, and then if it's not 0, we're going to do HP handler on take damage. But we want the grenade to actually do more damage than just 1, because that's how it works now. On take damage only takes 1 argument, which is well, not very cool, because it means that you need to throw like 4 grenade hits to kill a person. So let's go into our on take damage and have a look at that. And what we want here is we want to take a number, and we can use a byte because that's what it is, and we're going to do damage. And then in this script we are not going to reduce it by 1, but rather by the damage amount. Actually, let's change it to damage amount so we know what it is. But this is a byte So it means that if we are sending in 100 in damage amount and we're reducing it by damage amount here, then our HP is a byte, so it will loop around because it can't be negative. So all of a sudden the player is going to have something like 95 in HP, which is not what we want. So we need to ensure that it doesn't loop around. And we can do that by checking if the damage amount is larger than HP, then we just set the damage amount to exactly HP. That way it won't ever loop around. Okay, so let's save this and let's say our grenade handler. But we actually have an error that we need to take care of. So the weapon handler right now is using the on damage as well, on take damage, but it needs a value. So when we are firing our regular weapon, we wanted to make a damage of 1. So now we can save and try this in Unity. So let's go into our prefabs, because we need to assign the slots that we just created. So let's go into grenade prefab. And the slots we created was the collision layer, so we need something here, and we wanted to check against the networked hitboxes. So we don't care about anything else but the networked hitboxes, because that's who we are going to damage. Alright, so let's save that, and now we can take it for a spin, and let's fire up a client and just reduce it a little bit. We will join in with Eddie, and well, this player doesn't have a name because he hasn't gone through the main scene, but that's okay. So let's throw our grenade at Eddie, and yeah, he blew up. Awesome. And then we can do something like real stupid, throw a grenade and move up to it, and then we both die. So awesome. Our grenade is well, now fully working. So next up are rockets. So let's repeat the process and create a new script, and we'll call it rocket handler. And let's go to our prefab, projectiles, rocket, and let's open that. All right, and then let's have a network object on this. And then we will have a network transform, because we're not gonna do a physical based rocket. It's going to be a quite stupid rocket that just follows a trajectory which is straight ahead. So we don't need any physics on this, so we're just gonna use our regular network transform. And then we will need our rocket handler. Awesome. And then let's interpolate our target as we did before with the grenade, and we're going to use our model for that. And that is it. So let's open our rocket handler in Visual Studio. So we now know the drill. Let's get rid of all of this using Fusion and get rid of our mono behavior. It's going to be a network behavior instead, and then we will have a few more things, which is going to be our explosion system prefab, our collision layers. Great. And then we will have some more information about the rocket. So one thing is with the rocket, it's just gonna like fire and go in a straight line. And eventually, if it doesn't hit anything, we still want it to destroy itself. So let's add a timer for it. Max live duration tick timer, which is going to be 0. And then we also want to have some kind of speed. And we will do the same thing that we did with the grenade. We will have something that we're checking for hits, so it's going to be a lag composition hit, so we need a list for that. And then the same information that we had before, like who is firing it, and also we need our dear network object. All right, so when we are instantiating our rocket, we are going to use a mechanism called fire, as we did before. So let's make a public method for it, fire, taking the player ref and the fired by network object and fired by player. Right, perfect. And then we want to store our network object when we are doing the firing, so that's stored here, so perfect. And then we want to have our max life, which is going to be 10 seconds. Okay, so that's all fine. After we've fired, we want the rocket to move forward, so we will do that in our fixed network and fixed network update, or updated network. And how we'll do it is very simple. We are going to say that, okay, the transform's position is going to be, we're going to add the forward vector and multiply it with the runner delta time and rocket speed. So that's going to cause the rocket to just fly forward. And then we want to do some special things, as we did before, on the if we are the host or server. So we want to check if our rocket has expired, so if it has flown too far, and in that case we are going to despawn it. And if it hasn't, then we want to check, okay, have we hit anything? So we do it the same way as we did before, but with a twist. So we're gonna do runner lag compensation overlap sphere, but it's gonna be smaller, 0.5 in size. So that's just to check if the rocket is hitting anything. And in this case, we want to include the PhysX as well. So we want to have all the colliders in the scene. And we want to check at a certain position. And this position is not gonna be at the center of the rocket. It's actually gonna be at another place. So we want to have this ability to change where this check is happening. So let's add that to our collision detection, and we're gonna have a transform for that, so we can move it back and forth depending on where we want it. Okay, so now that we have decided or checked if we have hit something, we also need to look at our result. So what did we hit? The thing is, before, when we were using just regular weapon fire, we were using the option ignore input authority, which we thought was pretty good, because then if we have quite a lot of lag and you hit your own player, that's not going to affect it. But I just noticed that this part as well actually does not react to PhysX objects anymore. So this is not an option that we can use in this case, so we need to use that option. So we need to decide if our hit is going to be valid or not. So we're doing this in a very simple way. We're going to add a is valid hit, and it's going to be false. And first of all, if we have hit something, so the hit counter is larger than 0, then first of all we're going to say that, yeah, it's valid. And then we need to actually loop and see, okay, what did we hit inside this? So we are going to do that, and we are just looping through our hit counter, or the hit count, until we reach the hit count. We're looping the I variable, and we're checking, okay, did we hit something with that hitbox? And if we did, then we need to check that who did we hit. So we're checking, okay, did we hit ourselves? So is the root hitbox object the same as the person or the network object that fired it? If it's the same, then we're going to say, well, this is actually not a valid hit. We're just going to ignore it because you just shot yourself, probably due to lag. So that will filter out any hits that we have on our own player. But then we need to say, okay, what happens then if we have a valid hit? So we need to do something here. And if we have a valid hit, then we want to explode our rocket, right? So we want that to explode. So we can do our runner despawn here. Awesome. But we need to cause damage as well if we are hitting something. So let's do the same thing as we did with the grenade. This time we are going to check the overlap sphere. We're going to make it slightly larger, and we are going to use hit options none. Which is actually going to include just our hitboxes for the network, which, well, is good for us. So we're happy with that. And then whatever we are hitting, we need to check if we can deal damage to it. So we're looping through the hits, and we are extracting our HP handler. And if there is no HP handler, then we're not doing anything. Otherwise, we are taking damage. Awesome. So then we have our damage completed. Now we need to handle our despawn code, and in our despawn code we want to do the same thing as we did before, which is when we are despawning, we're going to launch our particle system explosion prefab, and I probably called it something else, so let's rename that so it is correct. Explosion particle system prefab. Yeah. And we are going to do we're going to launch this at the point which we checked for impact, and it's not going to handle rotation. Perfect. So let's save that. Then we actually need to fire it as well. So let's go into our network input data, and let's add a button for that. So is rocket launcher fire button pressed? And then I have the character input handler. So let's add a check for that as well. So we need a new variable for the rocket launcher, and this time I'm not gonna forget to disable it. So let's do that the first thing I do. Gonna put it to false after we have read it. All right, and then we have our fire. So let's add a fire 2, and it's gonna be is rocket launcher button pressed, and our rocket data is going to be network input data dot rocket is. All right, so now we are supplying the data, and we are checking if a user has pressed the button, so we can move on to our weapon handler. And in this case, we are going to add our public grenade handler, but it's going to be our rocket handler. All right, so if we are checking that, okay, we have fired our rocket, then we are going to fire rocket. And let's copy our fire grenade and call it fire rocket. Then we need our timer. And we're going to use that instead. So if our rocket fire delay is not running, then this executes. Perfect. So let's have a timer after we've used our rocket. Let's add, I don't know, 3 seconds. Yeah. And then we are going to spawn, and we are going to spawn our rocket prefab. And it's going to be spawned rocket. So this is pretty much repeating our same code that we had before. Not on fire ref. Fired by a network object. Okay, so we need our network object. I forgot about that. So right, we need to find our network object. Network object. And let's get that. Get component. Alright, so we had fire, ref, network object, great. And network player. Alright, perfect. So save. Now we can go back into Unity and try this. Now let's hook up our prefabs. So projectiles, prefab project explosion system, and check for impact point. So we're gonna have some point where we are deciding that this is gonna be a hit, and we can actually use our, well, we could actually use our front. So that wasn't actually needed, but let's add our model. So we have the front part here. Yeah, that's gonna work. And the collision layer, we want to check for the network hitbox here, because those are the ones that we are filtering out. Perfect. So let's save that, and let's take it for a spin. See what? Oh, actually, yeah. Player, network player, and we need to have our grenade, or not grenade. We need to have our rocket here. So there we go, rocket. Okay, now we can take it for a spin. Alright, so we have our host. Oh, it already fired a weapon. Right, so the Alt key is obviously as well reacting. And hold on, we can shoot a player, but we are passing through things. So it means that I probably messed up our collision layers. So let's have a look at what I actually put in there. Alright, so let's have a look at the layers. Alright, the collision layer is just a network hitbox, which is not correct. We need to have default as well. Alright, now we can take it for a spin. So let's start our client. Let's start our host. Let's reduce the size, and let's join in with Eddie. Alright, so now I'll fire a rocket at Eddie. Yay, we blew up Eddie, and we can hit our physics objects. So there we have our nice implementation, and we can kill ourselves as well. So we can do a multi-kill, which is pretty cool. And so that is all of it for our basic rockets. But there are a few things that you should be aware about or aware of, and that is that these basic rockets or rocket projectiles are very basic. So if you want to make a more advanced rocket or a grenade, then you should probably mind that there is some lag. So if we, or actually some delay, not lag. So if we are pressing our fire button, then it will be sent to the server, and then once the server has spawned the new object, then we are going to see our grenade. If we have a lag of 500 milliseconds, it means that it's going to take at least 500 milliseconds until it appears. But it's not a real sort of problem from a play perspective. It's more of a how the player feels, because even if I fired a rocket, it's going to appear at the correct location in space, and that player is going to be hit, but it's going to be sort of appearing out of thin air in the sort of the middle of the space here. With that said, there are you can use some functions and features in Photon Fusion, which is called prediction, and you can predict that we are going to spawn something, and the client can predict this and will create a sort of fake version of our rocket or grenade. And then when the server has actually confirmed that, yeah, it's going to be spawned, then it will just sort of take over and you won't notice any difference. And if the server is saying that, hey, here you spawned something that you shouldn't have for some reason, then it will just disappear. But for this type of game where we just prototyping things, I think the basics are enough. And the basic rockets are as well quite heavy on the network, because we're spawning new things and we're not recycling things with pools, etc. So that is as well something you can do to optimize this code and make it even better. But for simplicity's sake and actually getting something up and running, I think this is good enough. And if you have a low player count, then you won't actually have that much of a problem. Even if you're sort of having a 300 milliseconds lag, it's not going to be that big of a deal. And if you have even more than 300 milliseconds in lag, like 500, then you probably don't want to play with somebody in an FPS game that has a latency of 500 milliseconds, because it's not going to be playable anyway. I'd like to give a shout out to our Patreon supporters. It helps us with every single contribution that we can get. So please consider supporting us on Patreon. The link is in the description. This concludes this episode, and I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button and the bell to get a notification when the next video is out.